This is Washington Today for October 19th, 2021. I'm Nkoyo Iyamba. Here are some of today's headlines. Federal regulators are expected to authorize the mixing and matching of COVID-19 booster doses this week. This is an effort to provide flexibility as the campaign for extra shots expands. The upcoming announcement by the Food and Drug Administration is likely to come along with authorization for boosters of the Moderna and Johnson & Johnson shots and follows the approval for a third dose of the Pfizer vaccine for many Americans last month. The move was previewed Tuesday by a U.S. health official familiar with the matter, but was not allowed or authorized to speak publicly ahead of the announcement. White House officials have explored in recent weeks whether the National Guard could be deployed to help address the nation's mounting supply chain backlog. According to the Washington Post, the idea appears unlikely to proceed for now, according to three sources with knowledge of the issue. They report that it reflects the extent to which internal administration deliberations about America's overwhelmed supply chain have sparked outside-the-box proposals to leverage government resources to address the issue. The Hill's Alexander Bolton is reporting that West Virginia Democrat Senator Joe Manchin's refusal to support the centerpiece of President Biden's climate change agenda puts the Democrats' entire infrastructure and social spending agenda at risk. Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer's two-track strategy for passing President Biden's agenda was based on the expectation that Senator Manchin would give ground to progressives in exchange for their support of the hard infrastructure bill that he and Arizona Democrat Senator Kyrsten Sinema negotiated with Republicans. But Senator Manchin's infrastructure bill has passed the Senate, and he's still not signing on to the climate investments that are a key demand of progressive Democrats. Manchin's infrastructure bill includes billions of dollars in new money for West Virginia's needs, such as the Appalachian Development Highway System. We'll have more on the Senate and President Biden's infrastructure plan in a moment. First, we begin on Capitol Hill. President Biden's nominee to lead U.S. Customs and Border Protection faced a congressional confirmation hearing today. Tucson Police Chief Chris Magnus testified before the Senate Finance Committee. We first hear from Iowa Republican Senator Chuck Grassley.
My questions are relevant to someone who has been nominated for a senior leadership position within an agency tasked with securing our border and enforcing our immigration laws. Do you believe that illegally crossing the border between ports of entry should remain a crime under federal law?
Senator, I do.
Do you agree that sanctuary jurisdictions, meaning localities that refuse to comply with ICE detainer requests, are an impediment to enforcing federal immigration law?
Senator, I think it's very important that local communities do work with federal agencies that include ICE and the Border Patrol. And I appreciate your question. I think there have been some legitimate issues raised about the risk that communities may be in when they are enforcing detainers as opposed to making arrests. We have been advised in several of the communities I worked in that by our legal advisors and city attorneys that we should have an arrest warrant to be holding individuals for ICE.
What are your views on the notice to report process that has been implemented by CBP in recent months?
Senator, I appreciate the question, and obviously the better practice would be to have individuals be noticed to appear as opposed to notice to report. I understand that because we have not had enough asylum officers or immigration judges, and that's not just recently, that's been really over the past 4 years, and also because we have some very long waits for people to come before a proceeding, we have a real challenge on our hands. And so I think this is something that Congress is going to play a very important role in helping to fix, but I think this is definitely what we have now, a broken system.
U.S. Customs and Border Protection nominee Chris Magnus responding to Senator Chuck Grassley. Indiana Republican Senator Todd Young also questioned nominee Chris Magnus about a border wall.
So, despite the 1.3 million illegal border crossings this year, 100,000 unaccompanied minors, a massive uptick in human trafficking and drug trafficking that's taking a toll in my state and all across the country. Earlier this month, Department of Homeland Security announced that it will terminate the remaining contracts for the southern border wall in the Rio Grande Valley. Now, look, I'm looking for a series of yes or no answers from you, sir. Do you believe that canceling such contracts at this time is a prudent choice, given the dire situation on our southern border, yes or no?
Senator, I'm not working for CBP right now, so I don't even know exactly which contracts we're referring to. In
preparing for this hearing, you didn't familiarize yourself with that, sir?
I'm sorry, Senator, but I can't tell you I'm familiar with each contract that the Border Patrol has for infrastructure. What I will tell you, sir, is that I think there is a place for infrastructure, and I think that includes, in certain sections, completion of barriers, wall, other things. So this is an area that I want to learn more about. It's going to.
Do you think there is a role? Would you commit to reinstating the contracts once you become commissioner, should you be confirmed?
Senator, I can't commit to reinstating a contract, a specific contract that I'm not familiar with.
Because you haven't familiarized yourself with that.
That was Senator Todd Young. And Louisiana Republican Senator Bill Cassidy asked about migrants and vaccinations.
Hey, Chief, thank you. I enjoyed our phone conversation. I know there's been a discussion of this recently, earlier, but tell me, as regards immunization, why are we not requiring those who are being allowed to come into the United States to be vaccinated for COVID before being released into the United States, particularly in the context that the Biden administration is asking anyone that has a nexus with federal government to require their employees to get vaccinated? I'm not quite sure I understand the exception for those who are being allowed to come here illegally.
Senator, thank you for the question. And actually, I think any of those individuals, migrants coming into the country, should be immunized.
Thank you. And should be required to be immunized as a condition of being allowed to continue?
Senator, that's something I definitely want to explore. It seems reasonable to me.
Okay.
Tucson Police Chief Chris Magnus responding to Louisiana Republican Senator Bill Cassidy earlier when he testified at his nomination hearing before the Senate Finance Committee. Covering the Department of Homeland Security for the Washington Post, Nick Miroff is following this story. In your article, you write, Chief Magnus would take over the nation's largest law enforcement agency at a time when border agents are facing crisis-level workloads and their mission has become increasingly politicized. Let's start there, Nick Miroff. Do you have a sense that Chief Magnus's testimony today helped to ease the political tension with lawmakers over the border and what border agents are increasingly facing?
I don't know if it will ease any tensions. I think Magnus went in there today trying to walk a very fine line that required him to reassure supporters of the president, particularly Democrats who have been upset at the recent treatment of migrants in Del Rio, to assure those Democrats and immigrant advocates that he would be a more humane enforcer of immigration laws, that he would be sensitive to their concerns, and that he will be a reformer for CBP and particularly the U.S. Border Patrol that has been the target of so much of that anger because of its real, frontline role in enforcing immigration laws. And he has to balance, that against, some kind of need to signal to Republicans and many moderates who want to see tighter enforcement, who are looking at these extraordinary border arrest numbers that we've seen since Biden took office, and who want someone to enforce the law more strictly. And he said he would do that. And he even at one point signaled that he would be open to finishing some of the incompleted sections of the border wall, which is something Republicans have been calling for. So I think, if his goal going in was to sort of split that difference, he was successful.
And to that point, what did he say that stood out to you in terms of being able to appease both advocacy groups of immigrants and those who are law enforcement, immigration enforcement groups?
Yeah, well, I mean, I'd say, starting with, on the Republican side, saying that he would be open to finishing some of those gaps in the border wall was a surprise, given that the Biden administration very visibly halted construction, really repudiated the President Trump's signature project, and has torn up the border wall contracts. So in addition to that, he also made a defense of the Title 42 public health law that the Biden administration is using to expel many migrants at the border. Most recently, these Haitians who arrived to Del Rio. And he also, I was surprised to hear him say that he would support testing and vaccination for migrants in CBP custody. That is something the Biden administration has been reluctant to do, in part because the whole premise of the Title 42 health law is that it's unsafe to keep migrants in CBP and federal custody, so they have to be immediately sent back. So, on the other hand, I heard definitely him gesture toward those who are concerned that, he would just be, a law and order type, and he spoke, very extensively about the need to be sensitive to improve training for CBP personnel, and to treat everyone with dignity and respect. And he comes in with that reputation as a kind of liberal law enforcement reformer from his experience both in Tucson and before that during a decade as police chief in Richmond, California.
And to that end, are there any indications that any Republicans would support his nomination?
I don't know if there are. I think, the Republicans will view his nomination as a kind of proxy for their wider disapproval with Biden's border policies. And so he isn't likely to get any votes, although it's possible we'll see some of the more moderate Republicans who say that they're very eager to have Senate confirmed leadership in these immigration agencies. We could see maybe him getting someone like Senator Portman, but I don't know. He doesn't need any of the Republican votes. He could be confirmed as long as he gets all of the Democratic votes, and we've detected no inklings of any Democrats refusing to support him or scuttling his nomination,
including Senator Ron Wyden, the Democrat of Oregon, who's also the Senate Finance Committee chair. He stalled Chief Magnus's confirmation hearing from April.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, Biden nominated Magnus in April, and Wyden had not scheduled a hearing for this confirmation hearing for Magnus until now. Wyden was demanding that DHS release documents related to the deployment of DHS personnel on the streets of Portland during those street protests in 2020 under the Trump administration. And so it wasn't until Wyden spoke with DHS Secretary Alejandro Mayorkas recently and got the assurances he wanted that he finally agreed to schedule this hearing for Magnus. So during that time, CBP has been in very bad shape, and I think a lot of people are relieved, will be relieved if Magnus is confirmed and the agency finally has a Senate-confirmed leader, given the enormity of all the challenges it's facing right now.
Covering the Department of Homeland Security for the Washington Post, you can read his article, President Biden's Pick for Customs and Border Protection, Facing a Senate Confirmation Hearing by Nick Miroff at WashingtonPost.com. Nick Miroff, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you. Pleasure to be with you.
Meanwhile, Facebook faces over $14 million in penalties tied to a federal probe over allegedly improperly reserving jobs for immigrants. In a settlement, the social media giant will pay $4.75 million to the U.S. government on accusations of illegally reserving lucrative jobs for immigrant workers it was sponsoring for permanent residents instead of searching for and considering available U.S. workers. Facebook will also pay $9.5 million to eligible victims of the alleged discrimination. Now, according to the Justice Department, this is the largest fine and financial award its Civil Rights Division has ever made. Leaders on Capitol Hill and President Biden continue trying to get things moving and speed up negotiations with the Biden administration's agenda. According to Politico.com, the negotiations seem to mostly reveal how far apart Democrats are from consensus, rather than bringing them closer to agreement. Here's what Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer had to say about it.
Okay, first I want to say, we're only going to have to take a few questions. We had a very spirited discussion at our lunch, passionate, strong, and there was universal agreement in that room that we have to come to an agreement, and we got to get it done, and want to get it done this week. Yes,
Senator
first
Schumer,
question.
explain to us what that means. Do you want a framework this week, and how do you get there? Are you going to have separate meetings with your members, with the White House?
There's lots of meetings going on. The president's meeting regularly with people. Probably the president, the speaker, and I just talk now about once a day. And there'll be all kinds of meetings together and separately to get this done. But the pace is picked up. The desire to get it done is strong. And as I said, universal agreement in the room. We have to come to an agreement. Yes. Yes.
There's this rift between Senator Sanders and Senator Manchin. How do you get this done? How do you bring them together? How do you get them on the same page? What is that like?
What I've told our caucus is everyone is going to be disappointed in certain things, but everyone's going to be glad about certain things. And overall, getting something done of this magnitude for the American people is a huge, huge, huge accomplishment. And that's what's going to move us forward and bring us together. Last question.
When you say an agreement, are you talking about a framework, or are you talking about something that would be a bit...
Look, you can't write the whole bill within the next few days, but getting a framework done that is agreed upon by 50 senators and 218 House members, which we're getting closer to. We're not there yet, but getting closer to. And then moving both bills together is going to be what we're going to do. Thank you, everybody.
New York Democrat Senator Chuck Schumer. On the other hand, Senate Republicans continue to criticize the Biden administration's priorities. We hear now from Senate Minority Leader Mitch McConnell.
Well, we've all been fascinated by the stories all of you are filing about the difficulty our Democratic friends are having getting everybody in place on this reckless tax and spend proposal. The longer this lays out there, the more unpopular it becomes. I thought particularly interesting was the Gallup poll last weekend, which indicates how the public mood has shifted from the pandemic year, where people felt vulnerable and the government needed to step up and did, I would remind you, on a bipartisan basis. But now over half of Americans think the government is doing too many things that should fall to individuals and businesses, according to Gallup's comprehensive poll. And over half Americans think the government has too much power. I think the American people have figured this out. We rescued the country last year in a time of distress. This year, we had 3 vaccines. We were coming out of it, and the new Democratic government just didn't want to stop spending, and now taxing and spending as well. That is the reason they're having very, very difficult time getting everybody in line behind something that's increasingly unpopular with the American people.
Responding to questions from reporters, Kentucky Republican Senator Mitch McConnell. Meanwhile, at the White House, reporters questioned Press Secretary Jen Psaki on the urgency of moving the Biden administration's policies forward.
Thank you, Jen. As the president meets with lawmakers today, in his view, are there any non-negotiables in this package? Do any of his signature programs have to remain?
His red line continues to be that he will not raise taxes for anyone making less than $400,000 a year. And what we think about here is what we want to achieve, which is historic impact on how we address child care and care issues that families across the country are having, making sure we're doing something to address the climate crisis, and making sure we're more competitive and putting people back to work. There are a lot of ways to get there, but that's why the president proposed his packages. But really, the $400,000 taxes is his primary red line.
And you've talked a lot about urgency in passing the bill. Yesterday you said time is not unending. When does the clock run out for the White House?
I'm not going to set a new deadline today. I will just point you to the fact that today he is spending virtually nearly every minute of his day meeting with members of Congress, and I think that's a reflection of how urgent he feels moving things forward, coming to an agreed-upon path forward, and moving towards delivering to the American people is.
White House Press Secretary Jen Psaki taking questions from reporters. Washington Today continues in a moment.
3 of President Joe Biden's nominees for ambassadorships get a confirmation hearing on Wednesday on C-SPAN Radio live coverage starting at 10 a.m. Eastern, Senate Foreign Relations Committee. The nominees are Nicholas Burns, former Undersecretary of State under President George W. Bush, nominated for U.S. Ambassador to China. Rahm Emanuel for Ambassador to Japan. He's a former mayor of Chicago, former congressman, and former White House chief of staff to President Obama. And Jonathan Kaplan, a former technology company entrepreneur, for Ambassador to Singapore. That's live Wednesday, 10 a.m. Eastern on C-SPAN Radio. Or watch on the C-SPAN Now mobile app.
Welcome back to Washington Today. A federal grand jury indicted Representative Jeff Fortenberry earlier today, alleging that the Nebraska Republican congressman concealed information and made false statements to authorities. The Justice Department said that Fortenberry repeatedly lied to and misled authorities during an investigation into illegal contributions to his re-election campaign that were made by a Nigerian-born billionaire, Gilbert Shaguri. He is charged with 1 count of scheming to falsify and conceal material facts and 2 counts of making false statements to federal investigators. The House Select Committee investigating the January 6 riot at the U.S. Capitol has been ramping up its efforts in recent weeks. The committee has been issuing subpoenas to nearly 20 individuals, including 4 of former President Donald Trump's advisors and associates. One witness summoned to testify is former Trump White House advisor Steve Bannon. He's facing a criminal contempt referral after defying the panel's subpoena. Lawmakers on the committee have made clear that they want to move quickly to obtain testimony and documents related to the attack. Here's California Democrat Representative Ted Lieu speaking on MSNBC.
I do believe Steve Bannon will be held in criminal contempt. You cannot simply disobey congressional subpoenas and not be held in contempt. And the January 6th committee is going to vote. I expect them to vote for criminal contempt. But you raise a very good question. I'm going to let you know what my fear is. My fear is he's going to run out the clock. Because even if the Department of Justice engages and prosecutes him, he's just going to litigate this and appeal it to the appellate court and then appeal it to the Supreme Court. You have the case of Don McGahn, where we got him to come in, but that was more than 2 years later. Yeah. So I have legislation that allows the House of Representatives to execute inherent contempt power, where we can levy up to a $100,000 fine on him. And the difference is he'll know that if he loses at the end of the day in court, he'll still be stuck with a $100,000 fine that flips the burden. And I hope the House passes my legislation to do that.
Representative Ted Lieu, Democrat of California, speaking on MSNBC. Also, reporters asked Senate Minority Leader Mitch McConnell if he was comfortable with the party embracing former President Trump. Here's what he had to say.
Leader McConnell, over the recess, the NRSC hosted former President Trump at a donor retreat. He was also at Iowa for a rally where Chuck Grassley embraced his endorsement. Are you concerned at all, comfortable with your party embracing the former president, whom you said was morally responsible for the January 6th attack?
Well, I do think we need to be talking about the future and not the past. I think the American people are focusing on this administration what it's doing to the country. And it's my hope that the 22 election will be a referendum on the performance of the current administration, not a rehash of suggestions about what may have happened in 2020.
Kentucky Republican Senator Mitch McConnell. In a lawsuit, former President Donald Trump is suing the House January 6 committee to try to prevent Congress from obtaining former White House documents. Mr. Trump's challenge goes beyond the initial 125 pages of records that President Biden recently cleared for release to the Select Committee. The suit, which names the committee as well as the National Archives, seeks to invalidate the entire congressional request, calling it overly broad, unduly burdensome, and a challenge to separation of powers. The lawsuit requests a court injunction to bar the archivist from producing the documents. The Associated Press reports that President Biden and the Biden administration, in clearing the documents for release, said the violent siege of the Capitol more than 9 months ago was such an extraordinary circumstance that it merited waiving executive privilege that usually protects White House communications. We now go to the Senate Banking Committee, where Deputy Treasury Secretary Wally Adeyemo told members during a hearing that the United States will not allow China and other countries to manipulate their currencies for an export advantage. Here's the committee's ranking member, Pennsylvania Republican Senator Pat Toomey.
Deputy Secretary Adeyemo, I can't help but note the irony of you were discussing how and why it is so important that we preserve the ability to implement a sanctions regime in the future when you and the administration choose not to implement sanctions that statute currently requires. Let's take the case of Iranian oil sales to China. The Iran Freedom and Counterproliferation Act, IFCA, prohibits the purchase of Iranian oil. Yet according to the International Energy Agency's satellite data, since January of this year, China's been importing around 600,000 barrels of Iranian oil per day. And the administration knows it. On September 28th, Reuters reported that, and I quote, a senior U.S. official said, "We are aware of the purchases that Chinese companies are making of Iranian oil," end quote. Now, I'm sure you acknowledge that IFCA requires sanctions on purchasers of Iranian oil, right?
Senator, the law does require
okay.
on the purchase.
And you acknowledge that Chinese companies are buying Iranian oil in very significant quantities, right?
Senator, I'm aware that a number of people are attempting to buy Iranian oil, and our goal is to make sure that...
Okay, but we're not talking about attempts. It is a factual matter that Chinese entities are routinely, daily, buying hundreds of thousands of barrels of Iranian oil in direct violation of our sanctions regime, right?
Senator, we continue to monitor purchases of Iranian oil, and we look forward to using...
Okay, so you're making my point. I'm going to submit a written question, and for the sake of time, I'd appreciate a written answer as to why it is that you believe that the mandatory nature of this sanctions statute is somehow optional, because it's actually not. And we all know that this is going on.
Senator Pat Toomey of Pennsylvania. During the hearing, Senator Tim Scott, Republican of South Carolina, also asked Deputy Treasury Secretary Wally Adeyemo about the Biden administration's proposal to require financial institutions to report all transactions from accounts holding more than $600. It has been couched as an effort to catch tax evaders. Here's Senator Scott.
I would love to hear why you think it's important for every American's transactions to be made available to the IRS.
Senator, thank you for that question, because it gives me an opportunity to make clear the president's policy goal, which is to make sure that wealthy taxpayers who are avoiding taxes in this country pay the taxes that they owe. As you know, the top 1% of income earners in this country fail to pay more than $150 billion in taxes each year. And the reason for this is because they don't earn income the same way that most of your constituents do, which is by getting a W-2, which is information that a teacher or a truck driver or any other employee's company provides to them, but also then provides to the IRS. The reality is wealthy people often earn their income through partnerships or other ways in which they can sell an asset for $2 million, put that $2 million in the bank account, and tell the IRS that they only earned $100,000. What the president seeks to do is level the playing field so that wealthy individuals are forced to pay taxes in the same way that working class people do every day in this country. We're committed to working with you.
Thank you for your answer. Let me just follow up on your answer, because I do think you raise an important point. And I hope everyone who's watching is listening to what I think is an explanation that requires a little more questions. Let me think of it this way. The top 2% of Americans make about 18 out of every $100, but they pay about 36 out of every $100 in taxation. The 60% of Americans pay no federal taxes. Here's my question. For those 60% that pay no federal taxes, you're literally going to be having the access to investigate their accounts too. So if you're looking to simply find the tax cheats of the top 1% or 2% of Americans, you don't need a threshold of $600. You don't need a threshold of $10,000. Frankly, you don't even need a threshold of $100,000. What this threshold of $600 or $10,000 does, it captures all the information, all the transactions of everyday Americans, not the rich ones, but the ones working paycheck to paycheck should not be forced to have an additional burden on their plates about whether or not the IRS is going to be investigating them, whether or not someone's going to be harassing them. That's not about millionaires and billionaires. That is an actual additional burden on working class Americans. We can do better than that.
South Carolina Republican Senator Tim Scott. Thanks for joining us for Washington Today. A reminder that all of our coverage is online anytime at cspan.org and on the C-SPAN Now app. And if you missed any of this program, you can find it at cspan.org/podcasts or wherever you listen to podcasts. Also, if you'd like more on the stories that are shaping Washington, delivered daily right to your inbox, you can subscribe to C-SPAN's evening newsletter, word for word. Just go to cspan.org/connect to subscribe. I'm Nkoyo Iyamba. Thanks for listening today to Washington Today.
C-SPAN's Washington Journal. Every day we take your calls live on the air on the news of the day, and we discuss policy issues that impact you. Coming up Wednesday morning, Wisconsin Republican Congressman Tommy Tiffany on the future of President Biden's Build Back Better agenda and upcoming deadlines on the debt ceiling and federal spending. And then Kristen Rao Finkbeiner, Executive Director of Moms Rising, talks about efforts to ensure child care, senior care, and family leave are included in the social infrastructure bill. And then former Connecticut Democratic Senator Joe Lieberman will discuss his new book, The Centrist Solution, How We Made Government Work and Can Make It Work Again. Watch Washington Journal live at 7 Eastern Wednesday morning on C-SPAN or on C-SPAN Now, our new mobile app. Join the discussion with your phone calls, Facebook comments, texts, and tweets.